Well, welcome, folks. We've got an exciting program today. You don't want to miss any of it. First off, we'll talk about what the president has done, taking executive action. President Trump has made an end run around Congress to get economic relief to Americans. Exactly what did he do? Was it legal? And will it work? George Thomas has more.
Democrats claim the president's executive orders are ineffective and illegal, but the White House warns Speaker Pelosi and company risk angering the voters if they stand in the way.
The big sticking point? A reduction in the federal boost to unemployment benefits to $300 each week, with an additional $100 coming from states. It's 1/3 less than the $600 unemployment boost they had been receiving. Democrats saying it doesn't do enough to relieve the economic pain being felt by millions.
It doesn't do anything, and as the American people look at these executive orders, they'll see they don't come close to doing the job.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi questioning whether states can afford to contribute to each worker's check.
What the president put forth was a complicated formula which said that the states should put up 25% of the money. The states don't have the money to do that. They have expenses from the coronavirus. They have lost revenue from shelter in place.
The president's orders also call for measures to stop evictions, extend relief for student loan borrowers, and deferring the payroll tax on wages for workers making less than $100,000 a year. He even floated the idea of doing away with them permanently.
If I'm victorious on November 3rd, I plan to forgive these taxes and make permanent cuts to the payroll tax.
Democrats questioning the legality of the president's executive orders, and even one Republican lawmaker, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, calling Trump's unilateral moves unconstitutional slop. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin pushing back on the objections.
If the Democrats want to challenge us in court and hold up unemployment benefits to those hardworking Americans that are out of a job because of COVID, they're going to have a lot of explaining to do.
The president issued the orders after the two sides failed to reconcile the Democrats' $3.5 trillion relief plan with the GOP's $1 trillion offering. The four executive orders call for the federal government to spend up to $44 billion to help financially strapped Americans. But given the number of people unemployed so far, those funds will likely only last a few weeks. George Thomas, CBN News.
People are hurting. I tell you, the Democrats just continue to shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, this doesn't play well to the American people, and certainly the violence in the American streets isn't playing well. And the move by a Democrat district attorney to defund, to destroy the National Rifle Association is just one more thing that President Trump can be gloating about. Well, in other news, the U.S. hit a big number in COVID-19 cases. So what's the good news? Ephraim Graham has more on that.
Pat, while the overall number of cases is now more than 5 million, the number of new cases is trending downward. In a 14-day period ending Saturday, new cases dropped from 67,000 to just fewer than 54,000. And while the death rate is rising in 19 states, it appears to be stabilizing nationwide. Meanwhile, school districts are backtracking on plans to reopen. This Georgia high school, where students were pictured in a crowded hallway, is now holding remote classes Monday and Tuesday, after close to a dozen students and staff tested positive.
It was worse than I thought it would be because I thought more kids would be wearing masks, and I thought social distancing would be attempted in the school, but it wasn't.
Some 338,000 children have tested positive for the virus, nearly 100,000 of them in the last 2 weeks in July. Pat?
Well, it was thought that children perhaps were not susceptible to that disease. Well, they are susceptible, but apparently it doesn't devastate them as much as it does some of the other at-risk population. But they're getting it, and it was terrible. That girl down in Georgia took a picture showing all that crowd of students, and then they suspended her. What an outrageous thing to do. Well, they've lifted the suspension, but we don't want to be like China that hit up took the man out of his job who blew the whistle on the extent of COVID in China. Well, as the COVID-19 crisis continues, some Americans are facing mental health struggles. Among the most at risk are frontline medical workers and first responders. Now, an organization that helps veterans is expanding its focus to help medical personnel deal with the stress of nonstop pandemic. Mark Barton has that.
So the red color that we're seeing here on the sides of the brain basically are telling you that this person has an overactive mind, maybe an aggressive disorder of some sort?
Well, they would have some emotional dysregulation, some aggressive type tendencies.
When CBN News first interviewed clinical psychologist Dr. Timothy Barclay, we talked about his passion to keep veterans from harming themselves.
What can I do to really treat the population that I'm truly passionate about, but without giving these services away and going bankrupt in the process? It was like a light bulb that went off. Well, the only way to really do that effectively is through a nonprofit organization, and to raise funds and to do what we do here in private practice, but to offer that to veterans.
That led to the Collateral Damage Project, which helps vets battling post-traumatic stress, brain injury, and depression.
And that's not all. Now, because of the coronavirus pandemic, Collateral Damage Project also is offering free treatment for frontline medical workers and first responders.
Well, the treatment that we're offering for the first responders and medical workers, it doesn't use all of the research-based techniques and non-invasive brain stimulation and imaging that we do for the veterans with traumatic brain injury and things like that. Because mainly with first responders, we're going to be dealing with some stress, anxiety, acute stress, insomnia in the majority of cases.
Barclay felt his organization needed to meet a great need.
Work overload added to the stress and anxiety of just being overworked, but then also the additional concerns of for their own health and their own safety, and not only for themselves, but what they're bringing home to their families.
Collateral Damage Project is offering in-person therapy for Central Virginia residents and teletherapy for first responders and healthcare workers living outside the area. Barclay says each individual gets up to 3 free sessions.
So we just wanted to offer some relief to those frontline workers and give them a place to vent, learn some self-care strategies, because they just give and give and give. And sometimes at the neglect of their own personal well-being, which can open the floodgates to depression, anxiety, and insomnia. We just want to give them an avenue to help offset that.
An avenue to find peace in stressful times. Mark Martin, CBN News.
North Carolina residents were shaken from their beds Sunday morning when a 5.1 magnitude earthquake struck an area near the Virginia border. It damaged roads and some homes, and it is the strongest quake to hit the area in more than 100 years, being felt as far south as Georgia.
It was quite weird. We don't get earthquakes in the eastern U.S. We don't get earthquakes of this size more than every decade or so. There was the magnitude 5.8 in central Virginia. It damaged to the Washington Monument in D.C., and that was only in 2011.
Several smaller quakes preceded that Sunday morning jolt, and Pat, at least 2 aftershocks followed.
Thanks. I was asking our staff to see if they could find out if there's some kind of an earthquake fault like they have out there in the San Andreas and also the New Madrid, but apparently not. It's just the way it was. The Appalachians were built up, and this is just a little something kind of setting itself back the way it's supposed to be. So I think we shouldn't worry too much.
This isn't connected to the Ring of Fire like the California.
No. The Ring of Fire, the North American plate, the Pacific plate are bumping up against each other all the time, and they're moving. So, and the same thing, you know, that they have San Andreas as a clear fault line, and then New Madrid is another fault line. There's one running under New York City, by the way. But this one was just, they say it's just had to do with the Appalachians getting formed, and we just waited a few 100,000 years for another one, so I don't think that's a big deal. But I tell you one thing, it is powerfully hot, and Phoenix just set another record. Here's Ephraim with that story.
Pat, as you said, Phoenix did just set another record. Residents naturally not celebrating this. Sunday marked the most days in a year with temperatures climbing to 110 degrees or higher. Some 34 days, but that record is not going to last long. Phoenix is expected to hit 112 degrees today and even higher temperatures later in the week. A heat wave is also headed for the south. The index will make it feel like 100+ degrees over the next several days. I want to turn now to the disaster in Lebanon. Nearly 1 week after more than 200 people lost their lives in a massive explosion, the people of Lebanon are demanding a change in government, and they're calling on the world to help them do it. Here's Chris Mitchell with more from Jerusalem.
Since last week's explosion seen around the world, thousands have marched to Beirut's Martyrs Square to blame Lebanon's leaders for the disaster.
People are enraged. They are enraged that so many politicians and public officials were aware that more than 2,700 tons of explosive material was just left in the port for years without any safety measures.
Many clashing with the police. The battle lines are drawn as angry Lebanese protesters briefly took over some government buildings. Prime Minister Diab plans to call early elections, and several parliament ministers have resigned.
We will not accept what happened yesterday unless it is a turning point in Lebanon's history.
In a virtual conference Sunday, including the UN and United States, French President Emmanuel Macron told international leaders the future of Lebanon and the region is at stake. Yet sending help is difficult due to Lebanon's government leaders accused of corruption. President Michel Aoun ruled out an international investigation because he said it would delay justice. Many blame Hezbollah for the disaster, but its leader Hassan Nasrallah denied involvement.
I'd like to confirm today, I declare and confirm a categorical, absolute, decisive, firm denial that we have anything in the site. There is no weapon storage.
I don't buy this with the story at all.
That's because Middle East expert Dr. Mordecai Kadar says Beirut's port had become known as Iran's main arms supply route to Hezbollah.
Every night between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., Hezbollah actually was kicking out all the officials and the policemen, everybody else. And the gate was for itself to do whatever they like.
Kadar says the calls for change in Lebanon's government could potentially have the biggest impact on Iran's master plan that has helped Hezbollah entrench itself into Lebanon for 40 years.
Hopefully now the world will start looking at how Hezbollah took over this state, and maybe the world will do something about this or tighten the grip over the Iranians' head of the octopus in order to release states like Lebanon from this grip.
One Beirut resident told CBN News they feel it's not so much a political battle, but a spiritual battle over the future of Lebanon. It's why they're asking the worldwide church to pray for their country. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Much prayer needed indeed. Pat?
You know, ladies and gentlemen, whether you like it or not, along the way, you and I and all of us are faced with choices. We can make a choice to go one way, or we can make a choice to go another. And then we have to bear the consequences of those choices. Years and years ago, we were dealing with Lebanon, and the representative of Lebanon to the United Nations was a famous man. He was a great statesman, honored throughout the world. And we entertained him and got to know him and got to know their people. And they had an arrangement in Lebanon that the Christian people had the presidency, the Muslims had the prime ministership, and they shared power, and the country was beautiful. It was Beirut was the Paris of the Middle East. Well, now here's the deal. The PLO came in and started tearing the country apart, so there was civil war. And along the way, the Israelis fought down through Beaufort Castle, went into Lebanon, and they took control of the army. And they were now in control of Lebanon, and they came to the Lebanese Christians and said, here we are, we're your friends, and you can have a free Lebanon if you ally with us. So what did the Christians in Lebanon do? They said, The money that we have comes from the Middle East, from the Muslim nations, and we feel that we do not wish to be identified with Israel. We will be identified with the Arab countries. Well, now we see a country totally torn apart. They made a decision, they picked the wrong course, and they've paid the price for it. But it's sad for us to see it, that beautiful, beautiful country that is spoken of so fondly in the Bible. And the whole idea of Lebanon is those beautiful snow-covered mountains, the cedars of Lebanon. I mean, it's just a beautiful country. And they had the most beautiful situation at Beirut, to Paris, the Middle East. And that was a city where, I mean, if you were a shopper, you could get anything. They had all the latest fashions. They had jewelry. They had delicious food. They had beautiful hotels. They had everything. And it's all gone. All of it blown up. Desperate condition, desperate finances, and the country totally in chaos. You pay the price, ladies and gentlemen, for the decisions you make. So you need to be praying. You don't blame God for it. It wasn't his fault. They made a decision, and they paid the price for it.